Hey guys, welcome back to another TEKDEP PC build video. In today's episode, we're going to be building a recording and editing PC for the back room here. Just to go over the parts here, we'll start with the CPU. We went with a Intel Core i5-12600 on an ASRock B660M Pro RS motherboard. We have a Wi-Fi 6 capable Wi-Fi card here, 32 gigs of DDR4 3200 megahertz RAM, a 1TB PCIe 4.0 NVMe SSD, a GTX 1660 Ti, and that's all going to be powered by this MSI Mag A650BN power supply. And the CPU is going to be cooled by this Be Quiet PureRock 2 all black CPU cooler, and that's going to go in this ASUS Micro ATX case here with two installed intake fans in the in the bottom, and one exhaust fan in the rear. So let's go ahead and get into it. All right, so we're going to start by assembling the motherboard, which means we need to take all of this out that we need for later. All right, so now that we have our board all out and ready for assembly, very first thing we're going to do is install our CPU. And to install our CPU, we're going to go ahead and line up the triangle in the bottom left corner here with the triangle on the socket. We're going to open up the ILM and drop our CPU into the socket. Give it a little wiggle just to make sure it's in there. And push our retention bar back down and under, and peel off our socket cover. Make sure you put that back in the box. And the next thing we're going to do is install our RAM. And again, this is 32 gigabytes of 3200 megahertz DDR4. All right, so we're going to open up the first and second channel. Line up the notch with the DIMM and slot it down in. And repeat that process with our second stick. And that's our RAM all installed. Next, we're going to go ahead and unscrew the top PCIe slot here for our NVMe drive. We're going to unbox our 1TB NVMe SSD. And don't forget to remove the cover for the thermal pad, or else this acts as an insulator and can heat up your M.2. So that's our 1TB NVMe SSD completely installed. So now we're going to go ahead and unbox and install our CPU cooler here. All right, so now we have all the hardware and accessories we need, starting with the backplate here. We're going to go ahead and install some hardware to it. So since this is a LGA 1700 socket, we're going to be putting these little standoff posts on the far outside and clipping them on using a rubber O-ring. So your end product should look something similar to that. We're going to repeat that process on all four corners. Now we're just going to go ahead and lift up our motherboard here, slot our back plate through, and lay it back down. And now we're going to take these fasteners and secure the back plate to the board. And these do have a little plastic washer on the bottom to make sure that they're not contacting any traces on the board. Make sure those are still present. If they've fallen off, make sure you find them or replace it with another form of non-conductive washer. Now we're going to go ahead and take our mounting brackets here, and we're going to secure these on with the pointed ends pointing inwards at the CPU. All right, So now our cooler is ready to go on. So we're going to go ahead and remove this plastic cover that protects the thermal paste as well as the cold plate. And as you can see, there's already pre-applied thermal paste. So we're going to set that on. Take the center lever bracket and secure it into place. Make sure you're going back and forth on this just to get these screws lined up and have even mounting pressure. Alright, so that's the cooler installed. All we have to do now is take our fan clips, secure them to the fan, and clip the fan onto the cooler. And while we have the board out, we're going to go ahead and plug in the CPU cooling fan. And tuck the wire out of the way. And that's our motherboard all built and ready for installation into the case. Alright, so here is our case, the Asus PF01. It's a micro ATX small form factor case. So it is kind of taking the design principles from an ITX case, just allowing you to install a micro ATX board and larger graphics cards, as well as a full-size ATX power supply at the front here. So we have it configured with the default rear aspect exhaust fan, as well as 2 additional intake fans at the bottom. The CPU cooler will pull in fresh air from the top, which will be enough to keep this configuration cool. But the very first thing we're going to do is open up our rear I/O shield and pop it into the I/O shield port. There we are. So it's our I/O shield installed. We can now go ahead and grab the motherboard. We'll line it up. There it is. Now we just have to secure it into place using the included screws that came with the case. So that's the board fully screwed in. We're just going to go ahead and pre-run some cables for the rear fan here. And we'll pull the fan headers through for these 2 bottom ones, as well as the front I/O real quick, and then we'll show you how to route those. Okay, so we have all of our front panel cables pulled through. We're just going to go ahead and start with the easiest ones first, which is going to be the front panel USB 3 and Type-C connector. So we're going to start with the top one, which is the USB 3.0, this white header here. It's going to go in the respective labeled USB 3.0 front panel. It is keyed. There's a little bit of a notch in it. Make sure the notch is lined up with the notch on the connector and it'll slot right in. Just like that. And we're going to repeat the same thing here for the front panel Type-C. It is keyed. It will only click in nicely one way. If it doesn't click in really nice, then it's probably reversed. But just double check before you damage the connector or plug something in backwards. There it is. So that's our front panel 3.0 and front panel Type-C connectors plugged in. So now we're going to go ahead and move on to the front panel power button and power LED. It's going to go in JPF1, which is a little hidden. It's going to be right on these pins down here. I always tell you guys to reference your motherboard just to make sure you're plugging them in right. But typically the top 2, so pin 1 and 2, going left to right, are going to be your positive and then negative for the power button LED. And then the next 2 pins followed by a blank pin are going to be your power switch positive and negative. Okay, so there's our front panel connectors for the power button and power button LED plugged in. We're going to move on to this left-hand side here. It says HD audio. It's going to be this far left connector here. There is going to be a dead pin on the connector as well as on the board. Make sure you line them up and they'll plug right in. All right, so that's our HD audio plugged in, and our 2 fans are plugged into the fan headers down here. Again, that's going to be different for each motherboard depending on where your fan headers are located and how many you have. For us, we actually have 2 chassis fan ones right next to the fans where they're installed, so we went ahead and plugged those in. The next things we're going to install are going to be the graphics card and our Wi-Fi card. Following that, then we just have the power supply and everything will be all installed in this PC. So let's go ahead and start with our 2 PCIe cards. So to install these, the first thing we have to do is make sure both of our PCIe slots are open. And then we're going to go ahead and remove the PCIe covers at the back here. Since this is a dual slot 1660 Ti, as I believe all of them are, we're going to go ahead and remove the top 2 slots and the very bottom one for our Wi-Fi card. So I'm going to start with our graphics card here. Just going to line up the gold slot here with the PCIe slot on the motherboard and click it in. Alright, so it's all installed. We're going to go ahead and take the same 2 screws that we took out for the top 2 PCIe slot covers and use them to secure the graphics card. So the reason we went with the 1660 Ti versus something newer, maybe a 10 or a 20 series, is because this is actually a entry-level touring architecture card. So it has the newer NVMe encoder, which is going to help us with recording, streaming, editing, exporting, anything like that. Just speed up the workloads and take some load off the CPU and more effectively utilize the GPU. So now we're going to go ahead and install our Wi-Fi card in this bottom slot here. Same process, except it's not going to click in because it's only a 4x slot. And now we're just going to secure it into place using that screw that we took out of the PCIe slot cover. Alright, and that's both of our PCIe cards, our graphics card and Wi-Fi card installed. Alright, so we have the power supply installation bracket that goes in the front of the case, as well as our power supply here. You can see this is the top, so we're going to slot in our power supply. We're going to use the 4 included screws that came with the power supply to secure it to this bracket. If you guys are looking for any parts or tools you see in the video today, or an editing PC or a workstation PC, check us out at TEKDEP.com. We've got everything you need and we do it all every day. Okay, so now that we have our power supply installed in this bracket, we can move back to the case. And you can remove this front little vanity cover to make it easier to install, or alternatively, you can slide this guy in like so. There we are. And it lines up on the front. There's 2 hooks, one here and here, as well as 2 screws here and here. Alright, and that's the power supply installed. A couple things to do before you forget. Make sure first you turn on your power supply and that you take the extension cord that runs all the way to the back here and plug it in. If you forget to do this when you go to turn on your unit for the first time, it will of course not power on. And again, double check that your power supply is on before you proceed, just to make sure the unit actually works when you go to turn it on. So now we just have some wiring to do. So we're going to go ahead and run these to the back of the case and where they need to go, and I'll show you how to plug them in. Okay, so we have all of our cables routed. We're going to start with the CPU EPS 8 pin up here. That goes to the connector right down here. And again, all these connectors are keyed. They're only going to go in one way. And now we're going to move on to the 24 pin connector. It's going to go right here in the middle of the board. And now we just have the graphics card to plug in. This is going to take a singular 8 pin. Alright, and that's our unit completely wired up and ready to go. Let's go ahead and give it power and make sure everything turns on. Alright, so we've got our power cord here. We're going to plug into the extension that runs to the power supply. Now we're going to hit our power button at the front. And there we are, everything looks good. Thank you guys for watching. Leave a like, comment, subscribe. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments below, and with the help of the community, we'll be sure to assist you. If you saw any parts or tools you need in the video, check us out at TEKDEP.com or click the link below for more pre-built PCs like this, mail-in repairs, and data recovery. We'll see you guys in the next episode.